Republicans have drawn a line in the sand, saying they won't vote to raise the debt ceiling without, and I quote, serious reforms from the White House. With our national debt a whisker away from hitting that ceiling, is this really the time for games? Joining me now from Salt Lake City is Republican Congressman Jason Chaffetz, who sits on the House Budget Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the show. Pleasure to be chatting with you.
Thanks, Elliot. Glad to be here.
I just got to begin with this question. Isn't there something intellectually disingenuous? Eric Cantor, who is the Republican who has been launching missiles at the White House, pounding the pavement, saying, we're not going to vote for this, we're not going to vote for this. He voted for the huge tax cuts in December. Okay. He voted for the budget compromise just a couple weeks ago. You put those two together, necessarily as a simple matter of arithmetic, you're going to have trillion-dollar deficits for the next year or two. So he knows we're going to have to borrow more. How can he vote for both of those and then, as the leading Republican, stand up and say, but we're not going to vote for the debt ceiling increase?
Well, I voted against both of those, but I really like Eric Cantor. I like the direction he's going, and he's absolutely right. We got to cut up the government credit card. We can't keep spending we don't have. We can't keep just adding more credit to our problems without it being coupled with some serious reforms. I think that's a very reasonable stance.
Look, Jason, I think everybody now appreciates, having gone through the conversation we've had over the last couple months, everybody knows we've got a deficit crisis. The question is this the moment? The national economy over a cliff, a cataclysm, everybody agrees on. The Chamber of Commerce, usually a Republican ally, agrees this is not the moment to play games. And what I'm saying is that Eric Cantor, and I know you like him and you agree with him, that's fine. But what I'm saying is you can't be intellectually honest and vote for all those tax cuts, for the budget agreement a few weeks ago, and then say, but I'm not going to vote to raise the debt ceiling, because the debt ceiling is the necessary logical follow-up. It follows necessarily from his other votes. How can he explain that? Vote to raise the debt ceiling, and then we know we got to deal with this debt crisis. Isn't that the better way to go?
Well, usually the criticism that comes upon Congress, which I think is accurate, is that Congress doesn't deal with these things. We continue to punt these things 6 or 12 months down the road. Usually the excuse is, hey, it's an election. But it's always an election year. And so there are those of us that want to deal with it right now. I mean, I wish the deadline wasn't coming up, but we would still deal with now. But don't take this opportunity and use it as another excuse to say, well, we'll deal with that later. No, because look, that's why we got ourselves into this problem.
Congressman, I'm all for dealing with it. I'm all for making the hard choices. Look, you and I have had that conversation. You know, you and I may disagree about the choices we should make, but I'm all for making really tough choices and facing up to it. But I'm saying the one time you don't play with and light the fuse of economic cataclysm, because if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we can't afford to default on our debt. That would blow up the global economy. You and I agree on that, I presume, right?
Yeah, and I think, as Senator Toomey has pointed out, you can actually structure this so that you live up to the full faith and credit of the United States of America, make those Social Security payments, do those other things, and prioritize those. But look, the bottom line is we have to change the trajectory. Over the last 48 months, our debt went from $8.67 trillion to more than $14 trillion. We had a 60% increase in our national debt over the last 48 months. So what's going to change that if we don't have some sort of deadline to compel us to do something?
Congressman, look, we're going to put up a graphic that shows folks just how close we are to hitting that ceiling. But you and I both appreciate the deficits over the last year were a consequence of at least two things. One, the huge tax cuts that you and the Republicans voted for, and we disagree about that, but you acknowledge that was a Republican
I didn't vote for that. By the way, I did not vote for that.
Well, you didn't think they were deep enough or long enough, so just so that's clear. You didn't oppose
well, we also added, and in fairness, not only did we extend those tax cuts, we added $300 billion in debt, but we didn't cut any spending. That's why I voted against it. That's why I thought it was wrong.
The deficit is a consequence of those tax cuts and the enormous recession that lowered revenue so much. But let's switch gears just a moment here. The Paul Ryan budget plan, which you're basically in favor of, you've said if we embrace that, Congress embraces that, you'd be happy to vote for the debt limit increase, ceiling increase. Am I right about that?
Well, if that creates the systemic change that puts us on a trajectory to actually balance the budget and eventually pay off the debt. If we're going to move in that trajectory, of course I would support that. But if we're going to go what the president suggests, which doubles and then triples the debt, no, I can't support that.
Congressman, let me deal with what I think is an agreed-upon fact, because it comes right out of Paul Ryan's budget proposal itself. page S1, chart S1, he adds over the next decade $5 to $6 trillion to our national debt. Adds. He doesn't cut. He adds $5 to $6 trillion to our debt. Can we agree upon that as a fact? Those are his numbers.
There has nobody has put forward a plan that would balance the budget next year. I wish we could, but what the Republicans said is we're not going to put this on the backs of those 55 years old and older. So the trajectory is moving in the right direction. That's the point.
But it's
you can't balance it next year. You can't. I understand it. You can't do it.
Look,
you've got to be moving in the right trajectory.
You're agreeing with everything I've said. Of course you can't do it in 1 year. And in fact, Ryan's budget adds $5 trillion, which is way more than it should because he perpetuates the tax cuts and, in fact, he balances his budget on the backs of the poor. But that's not the issue I want to go on right now.
Come on. You cannot take that statement with a straight face. That is, it doesn't balance it on the backs of the poor. Come on. That carries no water. Absolutely not.
Congressman, look, fact. 2/3 of the cuts come out of Medicaid and public assistance for the least well-off members of our society. That is a fact. It may be an ideology, but that's not, again, we had that debate last time. I want to come up with another fact that comes right out of his budget. Again, you'd have to acknowledge even his numbers won't add up because he presumes the unemployment rate goes down to 3.5% in 2016, which can't happen, and the Fed won't let it happen because inflation would go through the roof, and so there would never be the revenue which he presumes. Can't we agree on that? It's simply not a real number.
No, I would not agree with that. What I would agree with that the plan, based on the CBO numbers over the course of time, balances the budget and pays off the debt. It takes a lot of years, takes decades to get from here to there. I wish it were faster, but it's a very reasonable plan. And if the president or the Democrats have a different plan, show me the plan where they actually balance the budget and pay off the debt, because the Democrats have yet to put forward a plan to do that. And this is the dialogue that we should be having. I think this is a healthy part of the process. But the president, to suggest that he's going out on this deficit and debt tour, having never suggested how he would ever balance the budget, I think leaves a gaping hole for us to say, we have a plan, where's yours?
Well, look, Congressman, I think with all due deference, the president's plan is very clear about where he will raise revenue. He is very clear about that. It is an ideological divide.
But it never balances, correct?
No, wait,
it never balances.
Paul Ryan's budget balances when? 2040? Am I right about 2040?
Just before that, in the 2030s.
Well,
yes,
the numbers as we 2040, because there were some errors. He made some simple math errors. I think he's acknowledged it. Arithmetic errors, and I'm not faulting him for that. Only small ones. Only $200 billion. That doesn't register these days.
But the president doesn't have a plan. It doesn't have a plan that ever balances, does he?
I promised you. I wanted you back. Have you figured out which tax loopholes you want to close?
I want to go through that process where the Ways and Means Committee weighs all those options. Again, we want to broaden the base, lower the rate, and make sure that we got more people paying into the system. Okay, that's what we're trying to do.
Congressman, we agree on that. We just got to, I got to pin you down on which ones, because that's the painful part. All right, Congressman, look, I envy you being out in Salt Lake City. Go enjoy the snow. I want to ski with you someday out in all the best ski area in the country.
Absolutely.
All right, Congressman, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, Edie Hill is with me tonight. Edie, what do you got for us?
Well, as the federal government worries about the deficit, the billions spent to help homeowners avoid foreclosure has accomplished next to nothing. An Illinois sheriff is trying to do what Washington can't, and he's getting results. We'll speak to him. Elliot?
Sounds like one tough sheriff. Can't wait to hear about him. All right, that's coming up. And next, the air war in Libya has just gotten even more intense. We'll go to Benghazi with the latest on that when we return.